All right, so this is section 3 of chapter 6. And in the previous section, we defined and discussed the importance of internal and external validity. In this section, we will delve more deeply into external validity and discuss specific threats that exist to external validity. Okay, so this table describes and provides an overview of 3 categories of threats to external validity. One category is participants. And this is when your results are specific to some specific group and may not generalize to other groups that are different from the group that you ran your study on. 2 is features of a study. And this occurs when results of a study are only obtained when specific characteristics or features of a study are present, and the results don't generalize to a different study that lacks those specific features or characteristics. And finally, measurements. And this is when the results of a study are obtained using a very specific measurement procedure and do not generalize to other measurement procedures. All right, so those are the 3 categories, and now we will discuss each category in greater detail. So let's begin with participants. So threats to generalizing across participants and subjects. And one threat that we've alluded to now on several occasions is officially referred to as selection bias. And this is when your sample is not representative of the population that you care about and therefore may not generalize to the population that you care about. And this is often a problem because remember, psychologists often select participants based on convenience as opposed to selecting them randomly from the target population. Now, if you're a college professor doing research, it is often very convenient to recruit undergraduates who are roaming the campus grounds by the thousands and often get credit or money for running in these studies. And this raises some issues that we will turn to next. College students. A lot of research is conducted on college students. And not because college students as a population is who everybody wants to know about. In other words, in most of these studies, college students are not the target population, but rather they are selected out of convenience because it is convenient to run them, because you have access to college students. And now you have potentially a serious problem on your hands. I mean, now if what you care about, if you care about college students specifically, if that's who you're studying, then maybe that's not a problem. But again, in most studies, college students are not the target population. And by the way, even if the target population was college students, it's still not clear that the findings would generalize from one student body to another. So if you collect your data using Ohio University students, will those findings generalize to MIT students? I don't know. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. Maybe it depends on the study. But again, in most psychology studies, college students are not the target population. And so this can be a problem if college students differ in systematic ways from other populations of interest. Let's say the general population. And it turns out that they do differ from the general population. There are studies showing that college students differ from regular adults that are not college students across multiple dimensions, which probably isn't that surprising. So it turns out that they differ in terms of self-concept, peer relations, compliance to authority, intelligence, just to name a few examples. And so, of course, this can be a problem if you hope to generalize your findings to a broader population beyond the ivory towers of a college campus and its somewhat homogeneous inhabitants. Next, we have something called volunteer bias. So one of the reasons that you usually can't sample completely at random from the population has to do with that pesky chapter on ethics and all those stifling rules and regulations that you have to follow. One of which being that people have to give consent. They have to volunteer to run in your study. You can't kidnap people off the street. You can't draft people into your experiment. And the reality is, many people out there just don't really care about your stupid study. I'm kidding, of course. Your study is not stupid. Your study is wonderful, maybe even groundbreaking. But that being said, a lot of ordinary people working jobs, raising families, dealing with the hassles of life may not be interested in taking time out of their day to drive to some campus, sign paperwork, and spend usually at least an hour engaging in some weird and often boring activity. Even if you pay them, which typically you would, although usually the pay is not very much. So some people may not have time. Some people may not be interested. Some people may have ideological or political or religious reasons for why they don't want to partake in some scientific study. Maybe they have medical issues that make it difficult or impossible for them to participate. So anyway, all that is to say that the people who run in your study are people who have volunteered to run in your study. And what if it's the case that the sort of person who would volunteer to participate in a scientific study is somehow unusual or different from people who would not volunteer to run in the scientific study? And this is what is meant by the problem of volunteer bias. Do your results generalize to the sort of people that would not volunteer to run in an experiment? So is this a problem? Are there differences, systematic differences between volunteers and non-volunteers? Well, lo and behold, studies have been done on this question, and it turns out that volunteers do differ from non-volunteers across multiple dimensions that are listed in this table. And so given that that's the case, will your findings generalize from volunteers to non-volunteers? And this is the problem of volunteer bias, which creates a problem for external validity. Okay, so more threats to external validity in the category of participants. So participant characteristics can be a problem if your study lacks diversity in terms of who the participants are. And so if you're using convenience sampling, it's possible that you end up with a sample of participants who are very similar to each other in terms of age or gender or race or political affiliation. And of course, this can be a problem because your results may not generalize to different groups that have different demographic makeups. And finally, cross-species generalization. So as we've talked about, not all studies in psychology, and especially not in neuroscience and biology, are done on people. Many studies are done on animals. sometimes primates, sometimes rats, sometimes cats, sometimes worms. Now, if you're interested in that particular species, then this is not a problem for you. However, often scientists are interested in people and will use animals as a model because there are similarities across species, because we're all related on an evolutionary level, and because there are fewer ethical restrictions in the things you can do with animals. And so, like most drugs are tested on animals first in terms of their safety. And if a drug poisons a rat or a monkey, there's a good chance it's going to poison you as well. But anyway, if you're using animals in psychology in the hopes that your findings will be applicable to other species as well, for example, humans, then you have to worry about cross-species generalization. And some species may be more appropriate if you want to generalize the findings to humans. However, those species may also be more expensive to work with and may raise additional ethical concerns. And so again, all of this can create a threat to external validity. All right, so we talked about threats to external validity arising from participants and specifically generalizing from the participants in your study to target populations. And now we're going to talk about threats to external validity that arise from generalizing across the features of a study. So the question is, to what extent can the results of a study generalize to other procedures for conducting the study? So let's begin by considering a phenomenon called the novelty effect. All right, so what is the novelty effect? Well, participating in a study is often a novel experience for most people. And participating in your specific study is almost certainly going to be a novel experience to the people in your study. So being a participant may be a unique, a stressful, a frustrating, or an exciting experience. And that can affect how somebody responds to your study. Now, the concern is that because people are in this novel situation, which may affect them in all kinds of ways, they, they may behave in your study in a way that is uncharacteristic of how they would otherwise behave in that specific situation. Okay, so another potential issue is known as the multiple treatment interference. So this is a problem if you have a study in which the same individuals are exposed to multiple conditions or treatments in your study over time. And specifically, the problem occurs if experience in one condition affects a person's behavior in a subsequent condition. So two examples of this are what are known as fatigue effects and practice effects. So fatigue effects occur when people's performance drops over conditions due to fatigue or maybe boredom. And practice effects is when people's performance improves because they have acquired more experience. So in other words, your results in the later conditions may be at least in part driven by the fact that people have participated in previous conditions. And those results may not generalize to people who have not participated in those previous conditions, hence creating a problem for external validity. And finally, experimenter characteristics. And this occurs when or if the characteristics of the experimenter, the person conducting the study, influences the behavior of the participants and therefore influences the results of a study. Now, these characteristics can include demographic factors, how somebody looks, or behavioral factors, how somebody conducts themselves, how they interact with the participants in the study. So a hostile experimenter may elicit different behaviors from participants than a friendly experimenter. And if this is happening, if your results are being influenced by the person or the people who are conducting the study and interacting with your participants, this is a problem for many reasons, but very likely your results may not generalize to a different laboratory with a different experimenter present. All right, so we talked about threats to external validity in the context of participant variables and study features. Now, the last category of threats to external validity that we'll discuss have to do with generalizing across the measurement features or the features of the measure used in the study. So let's consider some examples of this. So one phenomenon that may cause this issue is known as sensitization. And sensitization occurs when the measurement process itself changes the participants' behavior and may affect their reactions to the treatment. So let's consider an example. Imagine that somebody's conducting a study to test a new mindfulness-based stress reduction program. So how would this work in most cases? Well, usually you begin with a detailed survey of somebody's current stress levels. You want to get a baseline reading of how stressed they are. Then they undergo the program, and then you measure the stress again to see if any changes have occurred following the program. So you have a measurement before and after the mindfulness program. And this is all fine, this all makes sense. But imagine the following. Imagine that simply taking this survey about stress makes people more aware of their own stress, of their own anxiety, of the stressors in their life, of how they respond to stressors in their life. And what if this self-awareness, this newfound awareness of the stress in a person's life, changes how people respond to stressful events, changes how stressed they become in normal settings? This can be an issue because let's say you have people undergo this program and you measure their stress after the program and you find that there's a reduction in stress. Well, that reduction in stress could be due, at least in part, to some of these new self-initiated changes that have arisen from people becoming more aware of the stress because they've taken this stress survey. And of course, this can be a problem for external validity. Okay? Will your results generalize to the real world where this program will not be preceded by a measurement, a survey of stress? So another issue has to do with generalization across response measures. So think back to our discussion on the topic of measurement modality. And so when trying to measure a psychological construct, You can use these different categories of measurement, self-report, or physiology, or behavior, right? So if you want to measure fear, okay, maybe you focus on physiology, either brain activity in some region or arousal in the autonomic nervous system, or maybe you give people a self-report questionnaire on a scale of 1 to 5. How afraid were you in this situation or to this stimulus? Or maybe you observe their behavior and to see if their behavior shows evidence of fear. Now, the problem that can arise is that what if your results are specific to one of these modalities, but does not generalize to other modalities? And this can be kind of a challenging situation where you have to think deeply about what do your results mean, given the fact that they're only observed when using a particular measurement modality. And finally, we have the time of measurement. So imagine a program that helps people quit smoking. So you develop this program or treatment that helps people quit smoking, that people undergo. And then you have to measure their smoking behavior to see if the smoking behavior has changed as a consequence of going through your program. Now, if you collect your measurements a week after the smoking cessation program, maybe it looks as if the program is very effective. Maybe most of the people in the program are not smoking, have stopped smoking. But what if you wait longer? What if you collect your measurements a month later or a year later? Maybe you find that the program has worn off, that it's not that effective, or that it's only effective in the short term, but not the long term. So in this case, your results may not generalize across time points, which again creates a threat to external validity.